All right, let's do the gem, and then we'll do the shout out.
All right,
Gem time.
Let's do it.
Actually, matter of fact, you're going to have a lot of responsibility over the shout out this evening, David.
I'm ready.
So this is a very, very, very high stakes couple of blocks for you.
Oh,
It's a big deal, frankly.
Well, this is a big deal. Well,
Yes.
you know, we're sort of hitting the end of the year, and I just wanted to hit something that came across my desk recently, which is that global debt just hit a record of $255 trillion in 2019, which is very exceptional. Just
Setting records everywhere.
everywhere. Just for reference, you know, in 1999 it was 83.9 trillion, and in 2009 it was 186.6 trillion. So again, this is, you know, the combination of private non-financial sector debt, government debt, and finance, right?
I have a whole list of accomplishments that the group behind me have done in terms of this administration and this Congress, but you've heard it before.
Pretty much.
All over the place. Records all over the place, and that will continue.
But you know, but you have heard it before, because this is something that we've been building since the financial crisis, which is basically, you know, we decided we have this massive financial crisis, and the idea was just to make money really cheap and to try to pump money into the economy. So our economy right now is fueled by debt, and that economy originally was run by finance, which got us into the crisis in the first place. So you know, this certainly is, especially like a finance-based economy, certainly inflates certain assets. That's a big part of why housing's so expensive, because if banks are able to basically lend very cheaply to everybody, then, you know, you go and bid, and then someone else gets a higher bid, and it just naturally pushes the price up of all those assets dramatically. So while we're also seeing this massive amount of debt in, you know, for households in the financial world, we're also seeing, you know, a massive increase in, you know, public sector debt. Now, of course, not all debt is the same, and the public sector can arguably use this debt to create use values, actually like directly creating things that we use, and that's something that can be very positive. But we should also remember that debt is a way to enforce control, as we've seen within the European Union and with the IMF, to be able to force you know, countries to implement certain models. It also can allow, especially for smaller nations that take a lot of like private debt, it's a way to you know, impose capital strikes on these countries. Now, the reason this is important is because, you know, the fundamental crisis of capitalism has never been solved. It's just been constantly moved around. We talked last week about, you know, the inflation crisis under Volcker, and the movement toward a more like finance-driven capitalism in the United States and the UK. You know, this is just another way of moving around this crisis. We see what happens. We have stagnant wages, and we just have increased credit. You know, the student loan debt is ridiculous, $1.5 trillion. And let's also remember that, you know, people of color are really burdened by this, and they're most likely to default. Also, business debt is growing exponentially. U.S. business debt exceeded that of households for the first time since 1991. You know, this is something that is increasing, you know, at an unprecedented rate, really. And, you know, this is what happens when you have a society that basically the only model for growth that we have is to unleash finance. We've been told this lie for generations now, that the market will sort itself out. If you just increase the amount of financialization, it will make the economy more efficient. The opposite has happened. We actually have a very complicated society now that is almost completely divorced from any real production. Meanwhile, as this is going on, we're actually facing a massive deindustrialization crisis, not just in the United States, and this is something that a lot of people have been missing, but across the globe. In Brazil, Mexico, the Philippines, Peru, South Africa, South Korea, the Middle East, all across the world now, we're seeing this massive deindustrialization. So it's not just that capital is moving, you know, into different countries to create, you know, low-wage jobs over there. Capital is actually, industrialization is declining across the globe, because we are facing something that Marx talked about a lot, which was one of the fundamental contradictions of capitalism, which was the crisis of overproduction. We haven't seen increases in output growth across the globe in a very long time, and that means that any kind of productivity increase that we get from machines really, really hurts working class people across the globe. There's no way that capitalism is going to be able to get itself out of this crisis. All it's done is continue to move the crisis around. We really need to start talking about creating a radical new economic system. There's a lot of things we can do in the short term to help people out, but until we get out of this system, we're going to be in an endless system of constant crisis, constant debt, and constant pain.
We need to graduate.
That's it, yeah.
We do. I mean, I think the language of post-capitalism is both it's smarter strategically and in a certain sense more accurate, because we don't know all of the models, obviously. Like, we do know different parts. We know labor power. We know some elements of worker cooperatives. We know some of these things, but, and also if you read Marx, these were certainly open questions. I mean, the critique, like something like the critique of the Gotha program and the potential limits of a social democratic arrangement with capitalism is there, although that's already modified by Engels moving forward and when it becomes like actually more of a real possibility. But that being said, like, we actually know that critique and we experience that critique and there's truth to that critique. And then the second part of like, what does this actually look like? I think we know pieces of it and fragments of it. I don't think it's something that's still being prototyped.
Well, I think at the same, exactly. And, one thing that capitalism has done is it has, in a lot of ways has created, production lines that interact with the entire globe. There are for example, like finance, even like the shareholder company is like a potential way to have shared ownership of things, and I think it's really important too that we continue to hit on the fact that, the crisis we're seeing right now is actually like a crisis of overabundance.
Right.
And that's what gives us the model. Now, there's a lot of things that we're going to need to do, right? Because we can't live in a consumer society if we want to survive on this planet anymore. We cannot continue, strip mining the earth, right? But our ability to produce the amount of, human needs that are necessary to survive, we already have that capacity. The question is the system the one that is going to be able to, give us what we need? And it's not. It's failing dramatically for the vast majority of the population.
Well, it's creating scarcity where there's abundance.
Exactly.
And it's treating where there's actual limits as being abundant.
Exactly.
And that is producing ecological and social needs crisis.
So moving past that is the goal of our movement, and that's why some of the plans that Bernie Sanders is doing. We talked. Unfortunately, Labor didn't win, but some of the parts of the Labor Manifesto are sort of pushing us in that direction, and that's where like the hope can come from analysis. Actually, seeing that there are movements to radically change the way that we interact with each other, interact with the world, and interact with their economy.
You just watched a Michael Brooks show video. Subscribe to get them all. Why wouldn't you? Don't be foolish. Click subscribe below and become a patron as well. Patreon.com/TMBS. Thanks, everybody.